Welcome back everyone. Today we're covering a leveling guide for druids in Season 3 or Season of the Construct, and this will actually work in the Eternal Realm as well. So if you happen to play there, or this is your first time playing druid, or you even just picked up the game, this build will work for you. Now this build is going to have very simple requirements, and the reason for that is because if you're starting a new season or new to the game, you're not going to have access to all these materials like say veiled crystals, put all these aspects that you find onto your gear. We are going to look for one aspect, and that is aspect of the Ursine Horror, which is available for completing the Belfry Zakura dungeon. If you're having trouble finding a specific aspect, you can always find that in your Codex of Power, and if you go to one in particular that you don't have, say for example the aspect of the Ursine Horror that we're using in this build, now I've got this one unlocked, so I'm going to use the one below it, Needle Flare aspect as an example. All you have to do is just left click on it. That's going to pin it to your map. Now you can go into your map and you'll actually see the location and the route to get there. So if you don't have waypoints or you're just unsure of where it is, this will help you do that. Whenever I make a build guide like this, people are always asking for the location of the dungeons. It's just an easy in-game tip that you can use. At the time of recording this video, this is actually a little bit bugged, and you needed to reach level 25 in order to actually equip that aspect or put it onto your gear. That may change by the time you get a chance to watch this video. If you happen to be able to acquire this sooner, get it as fast as possible. Go into the dungeon, even if that means World Tier 1. This is going to improve the strength of your character, as this is a strong glyph for us, especially when leveling. As for the aspect itself, it can be equipped on several slots. What I would recommend is putting on something where the cost is cheaper. You can see here the cost of veiled crystals, going to be a little expensive as you start the season, especially if you try to put this on something like a two-handed weapon. So slap it on whatever you have. In this case, I had a ring available at a fairly low cost of 6. This is going to get this character and build up and running. For the skills, and I'll leave all the information for this build, when and where to place your points in a link in the video description for anybody that like the full build loadout. What we're going to do here is specialize into things that are essentially going to increase our survivability. Once we have the aspect of Ursine Horror up and running, we have plenty of damage to clear out the mobs. I'd recommend the domain tunnels as the preferred leveling place. If you're playing in the season, you can certainly do the seasonal questline as well. For a basic or primary attack, we're going to go with Maul, and we're going to put a second point into Enhanced Maul as well. This gives us a little bit of added survivability, and Maul generates 17 spirit per hit. This allows us to get into a nice rhythm when we're using Pulverize. What I mean by that is Pulverize, which is going to be our spender, costs 35 spirit. So if we Maul twice, we won't have enough spirit to use this. But the third one allows us to cast Pulverize, and then we have a bunch of spirit remaining. And from there forward, we can basically Maul twice and use Pulverize. Maul twice, use Pulverize, and so forth. And this will go on for a long period of time. Eventually, you'll need to Maul a third time. We'll also go into Enhanced Pulverize, allowing us to get an overpower for large damage on the enemies. This is really nice to occasionally one-shot elites or named mobs. Top of that, we'll have Primal Pulverize, and this is just going to reduce the damage that we take. Predatory Instinct is going to increase our critical strike chance against close enemies. We'll take this a little bit later on. Initially, we'll put just 1 point in order to unlock Iron Fur, because we want the additional damage reduction. And again, the when and where to place all your points as you're leveling can be found in the link in the video description. Earthen Bulwark is going to provide some survivability and Unstoppable, and we'll actually use multiple forms of Unstoppable in the leveling process, because there's nothing worse than actually dying and wasting time and slowing your leveling down. In order to activate this Unstoppable, we need to be spec'd into Enhanced Earthen Bulwark, which we'll of course do, and we'll take Preserving Earthen Bulwark to grant us additional maximum life as Fortify. Cyclone Armor is a fantastic ability to have on your loadout while you're leveling. This is just going to grant you non-physical damage reduction. You're likely going to be lacking a lot of resist during the leveling process, so this is just an incredible boost. Enhanced Cyclone Armor, this is going to allow us to slow enemies, and as we get higher level, after say 25, we'll start speccing into abilities that deal increased damage to enemies that are slowed. So this kind of works as a 1-2 combo. You can cast your Cyclone Armor, push enemies back, and then follow up with Pulverize, dealing increased damage to them. Preserving Cyclone Armor is just going to give us every 10 seconds some additional incoming damage reduction, and this is going to be nice over the course of time. And again, we're just really trying to mitigate damage as we're leveling just to keep us going. Debilitating Roar is also taken in this same tier, and this is going to provide a large amount of damage reduction, 70% in fact, and it lasts for 4 seconds. It does have a fairly lengthy cooldown, especially when we can't use anything to reduce this at this point in the game, but it's still worth taking as you see a lot of enemies coming, or just powerful enemies. It's going to absolutely save your life. The Enhanced Debilitating Roar is going to again add some additional survivability and the means of Fortify, and also in this tier we'll take Ancestral Fortitude, giving us more non-physical reduction, and Vigilance. This is going to give us 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds. It's a very long period of time. We have numerous defensive abilities, as you see just from this tier alone. During the leveling process, you can opt to take Poison Creeper. This is a strong skill that's going to immobilize enemies. If you're leveling something like the Domain Tunnels, this may not be as useful, and the reason for that is the large number of range mobs that can be found there. If you're leveling somewhere else or doing a mix of things, you may find Poison Creeper useful. You'll have to trade one of those defensive skills out for it. In the following tier, we're just going to go for some passives. Mending is going to increase the healing that we receive from all sources, but more importantly, we want to unlock Provocation. Anytime we remain in werebear form, which we will be in this build between Maul and Pulverize, We're going to have a lot of uptime in that particular form. It's going to allow our next non-defensive skill to overpower. Since Pulverize is the only skill we have that meets this criteria, that allows us to overpower more frequently and just get large hits on enemies, whether these be rares, elites, or even bosses of dungeons if you're choosing to level that way. So overall, very valuable to have this. The more overpowers you do, the more often you're going to wipe the screen with this build. For the ultimate, we're going with Grizzly Rage. This is another means of unstoppable, which is really nice for druids when you're leveling. There's a lot of ways to get stunned. Again, if you're leveling somewhere with a number of large enemies or just large quantities of enemies, this can definitely save you. On top of getting 20% bonus damage, you get 20% damage reduction, and the damage bonuses increase for every second you remain in that form. Just a great cooldown to have, since we still have access to Maul, we still have access to Debilitating Roar, and we still have access to Pulverize. In order to get the unstoppable, you have to go into Prime Grizzly Rage, which we will do, of course, and then we're also going to take Supreme Grizzly Rage to gain maximum life as fortified per second. Again, the theme here is just to make sure our character survives, rely on Pulverize to clear the screen when possible, and we're going to follow all of this up with the key passive, Ursine Strength, where we're going to gain additional maximum life while in werebear form and for 3 seconds after. This basically should have 100% uptime with this build. When you're healthy, you're going to deal additional damage and increased overpower damage, all of which are very good for this build. Getting up to level 25 is really the difficult part of not only this build, but druids in general. Unfortunately, they aren't the strongest class to level, which is why a lot of people choose to play them as a second or later character and basically get them power level. However, some of us enjoy it as a first character, and we need guides like this in order to get all the way up to max level. As you push towards level 50, you'll want to pick up 2 more aspects, and these are also available from dungeons, again just making the requirements for this build absolutely nothing, so you can rely on this build to be consistent no matter what you happen to find. The first one is Ballistic Aspect. This is going to give us +2 to Earth skills, or in our case Pulverize, allowing us to do more damage provided we have Fortify, and we're getting Fortify through our skill tree, so we have that part covered. The next aspect is Aspect of Quicksand. This can allow Earth skills, or Pulverize, to slow enemies, and now we don't really so much care about the reduction that it does in terms of slow, just more importantly the fact that it's applied. The reason for this is as we expect the skill tree starting to level up, we're just unlocking skills and taking some defensive talents. However, later on, as we work towards 50, we can start picking up things like Crushing Earth. We're going to do 15 times multiplicative damage to slowed enemies. Now we're automatically triggering this using Pulverize. Just a huge boost to our clear speed, allowing us to level quicker. We also have Stone Guard. When we have Fortify for over 50% of our maximum life, our Earth skills are going to deal 12% times multiplicative damage as well. We're picking up some other things as we level, including Earth skills dealing increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and so on, and this will be more beneficial even as we unlock the Paragon tree as well. Still very early in terms of the construct's lifespan, and most players have very few of these governing or even tuning stones. At this point, I don't actually have another tuning stone here that'll actually buff the ability that I'm using here, so don't want to say which ones I think are the best at this point, but just look for some synergy. What I do want to mention here is that I'm using a lightning bolt, but on top of that, I'm using this to basically add to the crowd control of this build. We've got increased attack speed, allowing it to be more frequent. It's going to slow, so this is where we're kind of synergizing. It's going to attack quickly, slow frequently, and on top of that, it's going to boost our critical strike chance. The enemies are going to be crowd controlled. We can benefit from our own skill tree, which boosts our damage done to crowd controlled enemies and gets some increased crit chance. So think about abilities and how they're going to work not only with the construct itself, but how it's going to synergize with your particular build. At this point, you should have Spirit Boons unlocked as well as you continue pushing to 50. We're just going to cover the ones that we're using here. We're going to use Wariness. This is going to be 10% reduced damage from leads, just an incredible Spirit Boon in general. Seath Talon is going to increase our critical strike chance, and then we're going to pair that with Avian Wrath, which is going to increase our critical strike damage. This is good from start to finish of the game, so that combo is always going to be very nice. Bolster is going to fortify for 15% of our maximum life when we use a defensive skill. We have so many defensive skills in this build that this is just going to amplify the effects of them. And again, we're building very tanky or high mitigation, so the early levels may be a little bit slow, but as you can see, by the time you work up towards 50 or World Tier 3, your clear speed starts to increase, your experience rate increases, and overall it's just better. Obsidian Slam is going to be powerful for Pulverize, right? Because the more overpowers we do, the more we wipe the screen. This is going to allow every 20 kills essentially to reset this and allow us to overpower again. So let's go ahead and jump into some gameplay here, and we're going to do this live. And I want to make mention that we are on World Tier 3, slightly early, not incredibly early like some other classes or builds can do, but we are capable of getting there. And this is important because the biggest thing we're going to be able to do for this build is start getting those item upgrades. This build does scale really well, and as long as we get up to the point where we can start clearing World Tier 3, we get access to those Sacred Drops. And the Sacred Drops are really going to help this build. They're going to give it a nice boost, and as mentioned, it just scales really nicely, and you'll start to take off, and basically you'll have no issue going forward. You see how the tanky mitigation there actually allows us to help survive? This is important, right? We don't want to be dying and having to run back, just wasting unnecessary time. Gonna leave just those couple of mobs. As mentioned, we really want to kind of capitalize on large clumps of enemies. And essentially here you want to get on the ranged enemies, let the melee walk into your spikes that are popping up from your Ursine horror aspect. And other than that, you're going to have really good survivability, just allowing you to clear everything, and the experience is going to be better. If you have any difficulty, you can always drop it down. This isn't a race to see who can get up to the World Tier 3 or World Tier 4 the fastest, but we want to make sure that we're scaling nicely, getting solid experience for our time spent, so that we can eventually get into a comfortable farming spot and continue to push this character up to level 100. Using your abilities is pretty straightforward. You can use Maul in order to generate the spirit, and you can use Pulverize to spend it. After that, we've got Earth and Bulwark, which you can use to protect yourself. We've got Debilitating Roar, which can reduce the damage you take. Cyclone Armor can not only push enemies back, but give you nice protection that's done passively even if you don't activate it. And we've got the Grizzly Rage, which is on cooldown right now. That's a damage boost as long with a damage reduction. And the general idea here with the defensive skills is just to rotate them as needed. You don't need to apply them all at once. If you happen to lose the shield provided or barrier from Earth and Bulwark, you can always then cast another defensive cooldown like say Debilitating Roar, but in general you want to rotate through them, just allowing you to survive for long periods of time while you work the enemies down. Continue to keep moving and essentially try to line enemies up with Pulverize, especially if you're lucky enough to get Shockwave aspect. As you can see, the build will do just fine, whether you want to farm World Tier 1, 2, or 3, and eventually work your way up to 4. I'd love to be incorrect about this, but unfortunately I don't think Pulverize will be the strongest endgame build. However, I think it's still going to be somewhat viable, so if Pulverize is a build that you enjoy, by all means continue to play it. I plan on respeccing just after I hit level 50, trying to configure something in which Shred can deal damage aside from poison. Now you'll still need the poison to be applied to enemies in order for you to be able to shred to them instantly or seek them, I believe as it's described, but I'm hoping to use a different element in conjunction with that. Stay tuned for the next video where I'll cover that. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch and have a great day.